Copic markers. Like, what's the deal? Maybe I'll use that. So I have this set of 72. It's so pretty, so pretty. This is not what I started with. I started out with a small set of just like a few random ones that I went to the store and bought myself because I had heard that Copic markers were great, and they ended up sitting in my desk for a long time because I didn't really know how to use them, and so I didn't like them. They weren't working for me. Then I went to a workshop where we had to buy a set of 15 Copic sketch markers, and I was a little bit hesitant. I was like, this is so expensive. Copic markers are so expensive. They're so expensive. It's insane. And what I found at the workshop was that I ended up using a lot of other people's markers because the thing about Copic markers is you need a lot of them in order to really enjoy them, is what I've found. Because in order to do any kind of like shading or any kind of blending, you need a lot of them. So there's two types. You can see the difference here. This is Copic Sketch, this is Copic Chow. I think that's how you pronounce it. I'm not totally sure, but I'm gonna say Chow. These are listed as like a beginner marker, the Chow. I used them just for kind of like doodling, and I didn't love them. They were leaving like marker streaks for me. Is that if you are gonna buy a set of 72, if you're planning to like buy the whole set, then it's worth it to just do that from the get-go. One thing that I wanted to show you before I do a demonstration is the different types of nibs. This is the chisel tip. I only use the chisel tip for like covering big areas like a carpet or a wall. The other side is either a bullet nib like this. The bullet nib is smaller and it's quite hard, or they have a brush nib. The brush nib, like I said before, is like a watercolor brush, kind of like a sturdier watercolor brush. So you can kind of bend it in a way that you can't with the bullet nib. The bullet nib is hard. It looks, and this is what I thought, it looks like the bullet nib is smaller and like you're gonna be able to get smaller areas. Not true. The brush nib has a smaller point. I wish that this was close enough. I wonder if I leave this frame, will it? Let's see. Do I have to bring it to my nose? I think you can see this. The bullet nib is not as tiny of a point as the brush nib. So if you're wanting to get into small spaces in your drawings, then I would suggest the brush nib. My set of 72 has bullet nibs. I think if I could go back, I would try to get brush nibs for all of them, but still works. First thing I want to show you is that I have two different types of paper. This paper is just your regular sketchbook paper. I don't usually use Copic markers on this one, and you're gonna see why. This paper is thicker. It is 100% cotton. There are other types of thick paper that work with Copic markers. I haven't tried them yet, but this paper works great. So I'm gonna go ahead and sketch something really quickly so that I can color it in, and then I can show you the difference. Here are two characters. I'm not sure who I'm gonna do yet. Will I do that person? Will I do that person? Not, I don't know yet. When I'm using Copic markers, I have to line my drawing. I find that it actually stops it from bleeding past the line. I don't know, that might be psychological, but that's how I feel, so I always have to line it. So I've got two faces now, and I am going to color them in. The thing about Copic markers, well, there is a skin tone set. I found that the skin tone set did not include a couple of skin tones that I really like. One is E21. This is my skin tone, or the closest to mine that I could get. Actually, it's a little bit lighter than what I am. Another one that I got, which I like to show like highlights or blush, is Rose Salmon. So these do not come in the set of 6 skin tone colors. The Rose Salmon does come in the set of 72. It's right here. See, I want to show the difference. I'm pressing. Oh my God. What? Why did that work? It It didn't work last time. Okay, so you can see the difference. This one is a brush nib and this one is a bullet nib. I'm gonna show you what it looks like to use these. One thing you wanna make sure of before you color is that you've given your Micron pen a couple of minutes to dry. There's nothing worse than going to color your drawing and realizing that the Micron pen hasn't dried yet, and so when you color it, it smudges or bleeds, and then you've kind of ruined your drawing. So I'm gonna go in and color him. Well, you can see that if I'm gonna zoom in on this, when I use my brush, I can kind of bend it as well, just like a paintbrush. So Soft Sun I've used so much because it's the skin tone I always use. So there's not a ton of ink in here, which is why I don't really have to get super close and worry about bleeding because there's not a ton of ink in here. But I'm going to show you what it would look like with a marker that I don't use as often, because I have to be really a lot more careful with those markers because they bleed. So I don't want to get too close to the edge. I don't want to color outside the lines. So there's one layer of Soft Sun, and it will change a little bit more as it dries, but you can see that it acts sort of like paint. It looks like I watercolored his face, which is really cool. I like it. It's not like a completely even, and then you can go in with a second layer to make shadows. One thing that's hard about this Soft Sun is I don't have the marker that is just a little darker. So for example, this is E21. If I had E22 or E23, then I could go in with that marker and do my shadows. But because I don't have that, I just go in and I do a second layer of Soft Sun, and it will have the same effect. So I'm gonna do that kind of shadow around his hairline, and then a little bit under his eyebrows, and then under his lip, under his nose, anywhere where there would be a shadow on your face. Oh, I color it outside the lens. Actually, that's helpful because I'm going to show you a trick. You can see that just under his nose, I colored outside of the line. So I'm actually going to get my white gel pen. This is a Jelly Roll pen. And I'm going to just color that little bit. And then you can see that you can't see it anymore. You might be able to see the white, but it's almost invisible. So that's a really good hack. You should definitely get white gel pens for correcting mistakes. I also like to use rose salmon to just give a little bit of pink. See how I was much more careful with this one? It's because I don't use it as often and it has a lot more ink in it. Then what I have to do is I have to go over with Soft Sun again so that it's not as pink. It's like I blend it a little bit. One thing that I always try to make sure of is that if I'm using a color, I have one that's a little bit darker. I'm going to use E27 Milk Chocolate for his hair, but I want to make sure that I have E29 Dark Umber or Burnt Umber so that I can then do some like low lights in his hair. So I have to get really close. I have to get like my face up in there. And I'm just doing like really gentle strokes. Now I'm gonna go in with Burnt Umber, the bullet side. And I'm gonna, especially over here, like where the roots are. And I'm also... This guy's got kind of weird hair. That's okay. This is not a drawing tutorial. It's just a review of the markers. Another thing, that I wanted to do was to draw a neck. Another common place to draw a shadow is underneath the neck. Let that go. And then cover it again with that. You see it blended really well. Sometimes you want that. Sometimes you want to act quickly so that there's no, it's like no definition between the two colors. See that here? It's like darker at the top and lighter at the bottom, but there's no clear definition of where one shade starts and one shade ends. Okay, now it's time to color her. I'm going to show you a different skin tone. I'm actually going to use sand for this girl's skin. This is what a sand looks like. I really like that color. So you're gonna see now what it looks like to color in with the bullet nib. It's actually a little bit harder because it's not as soft as the brush nib. So you can, and it covers a smaller area, so you can see it's a little bit harder. One thing to know is when I color, I don't go right up to the line because these markers bleed a little bit, and you'll get used to, you'll end up knowing like how much is it going to bleed, so you can sort of predict and plan accordingly. But don't go right up to the edge when you first start. You can already see a difference between how this paper receives the color and how this paper receives the color. So if you look closely, I mean, this is not dry yet, but there's like white dots. The paper doesn't fully absorb the color, whereas this paper does, you can see. One thing that I have found is that you want to make sure you're using the best materials, because let's say I only have this paper and I spent all this money on these Copic markers and this is what it came out looking like. I would think that I'm just a bad artist. I would think like, I don't know what I'm doing. This is my fault. But really part of it is the paper. So you need to, like, it's so helpful to have the best materials because then you really know what your skill is and what is actually the fault of your materials. So I'm going to go over this again. Now I don't need to only do one layer on this because I have a color that will be a little bit darker, E35, see? So I have E33 for the base of her skin, and then I'm going to use E35 for any shadows I do. You can see that it took so much more color from this marker to color in this paper, even though this one is thicker. Now this is called chamois, but E35. Let's use a different color for her hair. I'm gonna use sanguine. Let's see how these two colors will blend, because for her hair, if I'm gonna use sanguine, I wanna make sure that I have a color that's like gonna be good for low lights and stuff. Let's see. Yeah, that works. Sanguine it is. All right. What I'm noticing about this one is that the colors are a little bit more gray. I don't know if you can see that on the camera. I hope you can. But the colors are grayer, which is a shame because Copic markers, the nice thing about them is that they are so rich in color. She's funny. I like her. Here's the final verdict. This color definitely looks richer. It works, this works, but you can see like white dots a little bit, right? It doesn't fully absorb the color, and here it does. I'm going to show the same color on one versus another. So let's see. So here's ultramarine on here. Ooh, yeah, this shows it. Look at this color and look at this color. So what I find with regular paper is I end up having to go over it multiple times, and that actually ends up using more ink. So there you have it, folks. I have not used all of these colors. Boop, boop. You might be looking at them and feeling like, oh, I would only use 10 of those. The more drawings you do, the more you'll realize that like when you're missing just one color, like one shade of one color, it can throw off a whole drawing. But again, I'll say I don't think it's worth getting these Copic markers if you're not going to be using them very, very frequently or to be making money. That's my take. That being said, I have not used any of the competitors. Like I haven't used any other alcohol-based markers. I've only used Copic markers, so I can't compare to other versions that I know are cheaper. Copic markers, if you are planning to use them for art that you're gonna sell, or if you're just, you have the money and you plan to use them a lot, it's worth it. With this set of 72, you still have to buy some individual. You do have to supplement, but there are also other sets of 72, so you could build that way too, if you got a lot of money. Not me. I hope if you're looking to buy Copic markers that gave you like a good overview of what they're good for and like some tips for using them. If you have any other questions, please comment. Let me know if you want to see anything else, any other kind of demonstrations, whether it's with Copic markers or anything else. I would be so happy to do it. All right, bye.